Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf tet in Masechet Avodah Zarah. We are at the bottom of Chet Amabet. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Yesterday, um, we learned a Mishnah that listed several idolatrous holidays, one of which is called Kretesim. And the Gemara defined that as the day that Rome gained its sovereignty. And so that led us to a discussion of the fact that Rome was only able to win its war with the Greeks and gain this sovereignty by partnering with the Jewish people pursuant to an agreement to share power, where if we would be kings, then they would be governors. If they would be kings, we would be governors. And so, but the Gemara notes that after 26 years, the Romans violated the agreement and subjugated the Jews. So at the end of the day yesterday, the Gemara asked how we know that the Romans kept their word for 26 years. And the Gemara shared a story in which Rabbi Yishmael said, while sick, in the name of his father, that Rabbi Yossi, that Rome began to rule over Israel 180 years prior to the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. So we haven't yet answered where the 26 years come from, but we now have two elements in order to figure it out. First, we know that we're trying to prove 26 years. And the second is we know that Rome ruled over the Jewish people for 180 years prior to the Beis Hamikdash. So as we pick up with the two dots on the bottom line of Chet Amabet, the Gemara questions this 180-year figure, which will bring us to the proof that the Romans kept their word only for 26 years. So, Mea Ushmonim Svisulo, is it true that the Romans only ruled for 180 years prior to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Tani Rabbi Yossi Berebi, Rabbi Yossi Berebi taught in a brisa, Malchus Paras, as we turn to Tet Amud Aleph, Malchus Paras, Bifnei Habayis Shloshim Va'arba Shana. Before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, or during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, they ruled for 34 years. So they ruled for the first 34 years of the second Beis Hamikdash. Malchus Yavan Bifnei Habayis Mea Ushmonim Shana. Then the Greeks ruled for 180 years. Malchus Chashmonai Bifnei Habayis Mea V'Shalosh. Then the Chashmonaim ruled for 103 years. And then Malchus Beis Hordos Mea V'Shalosh. And then the kingship of the Herod family, which was a family of slaves that ruled after the Chashmonaim. So they ruled for 103 years. If you want to know what's happened since then, so just calculate the number of years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what do we see from this? We see Alma Ma'asan V'Shis Havu. There were 206 years post-Greeks. Well, the Greeks, 103 for the Chashmonaim, 103 for the Harodim, and so for Hordos, and so that's 206.
Correct.
So 206.
That's actually pretty close to right, according to First Maccabees and Josephus.
Okay, well that's good. It's always nice when the history matches the Gemara.
Yeah.
But more, but how does that stack up against historical?
Well, that's what Charlie was just saying. That actually that is it matches. It matches. So
it's pretty close. Yeah.
But 1 second, right? So we now just said that the Romans ruled for 206 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. But what was the number that we gave before?
103.
No. What was the number that we gave yesterday? Yesterday we gave the number 180. Exactly. We gave the number 180. So At Amrat Mea Ushmonim Havu. You said, this is Rabbi Yishmael in the name of his father, Rabbi Yossi, said that it was 180 years. So how do we resolve that potential difference? Exactly. Ela Esrin B'Shishnin Kamu Behem Nusayhu Bahadi Yisrael. No, well, those 26 years, they were they fulfilled their agreement with the Jewish people. Because what did we say about the 180 years? It wasn't actually 180 years that the Romans ruled before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. That was the number of years that the Romans ruled over the Jewish people before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So they actually ruled for 206 years prior to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That puts it, I guess, roughly, 135 BCE. And so as a result, that is the, and so the first 26 years of that time period, they did not, below Ishtabu, Abdu Bahu, and they did not subjugate the Jewish people. Okay, Kishipashta Malchus Harusha and as far as the years that Rabbi Shmuel did not and so as a result, so those extra years where they did not subjugate the Jewish people, that's what Rabbi Yishmael didn't include. And so that's why he said, Kishib Pashta Malchus Harisha al Yisrael. That where the 180 years is when the wicked kingdom of the Romans extended their rule over the Jewish people. Okay. So now we've successfully proven it. And so now we understand where those 26 years came from. Now, having cited the possibility of calculating the number of years since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Gemara provides guidance for making this calculation. So basically, we're going to see that Sofrim, scribes, basically used the origin date for the Greeks in order to use as a measurement of what year it was. Meaning they didn't have the Common Era or before the Common Era. They certainly didn't have before the Common Era. That would be pretty funny. But the point is that they didn't have a standard year setting. And so the question was, what year did they use? And they would use the year that the Greeks got power. Now, when was that? If we do the math, we're going to see, right? It was 206 is for 103 for Herod, 103 for the Chashmonim, that's 206. 180 before that was the Greeks. So that's a total of 386 years. Now we are going to see that the first 6 years of those years, their rulership did not extend that far. That did not extend over the entire world. They'd gotten to Israel, but they did not get over the entire world. And so as a result, those first 6 years are not used by the people in Bavel to sort of determine the scribal year. And so as a result, it ends up being that they began the count 380 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So with that as background, that's what scribes would do. Amar of Papa, Itai Haitana. If a Tana who's teaching the Torah wants to know how long it was, how many years it was since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, V'lo yada prate kamahava, and he doesn't know the single digits, right? At this era, in the hundreds of years later, people knew exactly how long ago it was, how many centuries ago it was that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. What they didn't know was the tens numbers and the ones numbers. They didn't know the last 2 digits, as Rashi puts it. V'lo yada b'minyan shanim she'achar churban. Oh, let's just tell you where this Rashi is. It's 9 lines down in the narrow lines on Tet Amud Aleph. V'lo yada b'minyan shanim she'achar churban. They didn't know, this Tana doesn't know, the number of years that it's been since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Churban Abayis. Kama shanim. And ta b'shana. And what he's making mistaken is whether it's 1 year or, shehu omeid. But it's what year is it that he's in at the moment? Lo yada ishanas kaf he doesn't know if it's year 20. Hameo said it's in addition to however many hundreds, which he would know. He doesn't know whether it's year 20, Oshnas Kaf Aleph, Oshtayim, meaning it could be 120 years, 121 years, 122 years. He might not know. They didn't have the same degree of history books, and they certainly didn't have the internet to go and take or Siri to ask the question of how many years has it been since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what should you do if you're in that situation? So lishayle lisafra kamaksiv. So you ask a scribe what year they are writing. Now remember, they begin with 380 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So v'nitve alayu esrin. So you add 20 years to their number, and then you get the right number. So if it's been 403 years since the 403 years since the founding of the Greeks, well, that means that it was 403 minus 380 is 23. So what you do is you just take that last digit, the 3, the 03, and you add 20 to it. And that will give you the tens and ones digits of the number of years. V'nitvu alayhu esrin shnin. So add 20 years to it. As Rashi says, third to last of the narrow lines in Rashi, v'nitvu alayhu, tana esrin shanim. For the Tana should just add 20 years. Im yeshlo l'sofer prat tetvav. If the last two digits of a sofer were 15, al klale leminyan, in addition to the Yevanim, in terms of the excluding the hundreds that were associated with the Greeks, yeshlo l'tana lamidhei. So then you would know that there would be 35 years. Prat al klalo leminyan shnei chorban. In addition to however many centuries it's been since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Umashkach le l'chumrei, and there you'll find your answer. The simanayech and the siman that you're supposed to add 20 years is zeli esrim shana beveisecha. Right? Yaakov says that he's been 20 years in the house of Lavan, and so that is the approach of figuring out how many years it's been since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash from the knowing how many years the Greeks have ruled. The Itai Sofra. Now, if you happen to be in the other direction, if you were a sofer, a scribe, and you don't know how many years it's been for the Greeks, you'll know the number of centuries again, but you won't know which year within the century it is. So Nishayla Latano Kama Chashiv, go ask a Tana how many years it's been since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. V'nivzer minahu esrin shnin, and then just subtract 20. So if it's been 542 years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, well, you'd subtract 20 from the 42. That gets you to 22. And then you already know the centuries. It'll be, 9 centuries. So you'll know that it's 9 centuries and 22 years. So nivzer minayu esrin shnin umashkach lech l'chumra, and you'll find the answer. Simanayach, and the siman that you need to do the adding for the Tana and the subtracting for the sofer is the sense of the following phrase, the sort of a saying. Safra betzira Tana tosfa. A sofer is going to be very careful and sparing, meaning, as Rashi puts it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the wide lines, very beginning of the line. Safra b'tziru medaktik b'tevos. He's going to be careful with the words that he's writing. The kosvan b'misora, and he'll write them as the tradition says. The chesron osios, and sometimes like the letter vav, which can be inserted in order to highlight that it's an O sound, so sometimes we don't need it, and they won't write it, and so they are going to be more sparing. Whereas Tana Tosva, when you're teaching Torah, you need to be more inclusive. You need to give additional details. So that's the point. So that is the basis of the calculation between the Roman dates and the I'm sorry, the Greek dates and the dates since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so since we've been counting years of rulership, the Gemara now quotes a brisa taught by the Yeshiva of Eliyahu that reviews time since creation. Tana de Eliyahu, Sheshes Alafim Shana Havia Olam. The world is going to be around for 6,000 years, or, the regular operations of the world are going to be for 6,000 years. Shnei Alafim Tohu, 2,000 years of nothingness. Shnei Alafim Torah, 2,000 years of Torah. And Shnei Alafim Yemos HaMashiach, and 2,000 years of the Mashiach. Now, where are we? We're obviously in this last section. In fact, it's right now 5,785. And so as a result, we're coming towards the end of that. And so, the sort of at the very least, our feeling is that, something's going to happen, for us in the year 6,000, but we'll see. But okay, so we have these three sets of 2,000 years. Now, essentially, the Mashiach should have come 1,785 years ago, right? Because that was when the fifth millennium began. But because of our great sins, yatsu mehen mashi yatsu behen. All the years that have happened since the year 4,000 have taken away from us having dates, time within the Mashiach, time of Mashiach. Shnei alafim Torah me'emas. So when exactly does those 2,000 years of Torah begin? Because Matan Torah, if you want to tell me that it's when Matan Torah happened, ad hashta leka kulihai. Well, then, that would mean that we are not yet at the end of the fourth millennium. But tekima ainat bahu. But when you compute it from the years of creation until now, trey alfe prate dahai alpha hu dahave. It's the two. It was more than that into the into this millennium. And so as a result, meaning if you calculate the time from creation to the time of the Torah giving, so it would have been more than 2 millennium. In fact, we know the amazing coincidence, maybe it's not a coincidence, is the fact that in our years, 1948 was the year that Israel was founded. In the years from creation, 1948 is the year that Abraham was born. So we know that it's not, that it was many years later. So the bottom line is that we need to figure out what the story is. So Ella mivi es hanefesh asher asu b'charan. Rather, the time that the second age began, the age of Torah began, that was when Abraham began to, what it says is literally made people in Haran. Ugamiri to Abraham ba'hishaita bar chamshin v'tarti havi. That he was 52 at the time, and what it means by making people in Haran is that he was converting people to Judaism. He was effectively teaching them Torah, and so that was the beginning of the Torah epoch. So kama b'tziran miditani tana. So how many years were there that you would take out from when the Torah was given to go back all the way to when Abraham was 52? Arba me'ah v'arba'im utmanaya shnin havyan. There would be 448 years. So kima ainat be mehanefesh asher asu b'charan ad matan Torah. That would be the number of years between when Abraham was beginning the concept of making people in Haran until the giving of Torah. So arba'im tmana shnin havya. That's exactly the same number of years. So the number of years between now, between what the Gemara's time and the calculation, the difference between the Torah, the giving of the Torah and Abraham was 448. So too, 448 matches the time between Abraham and the giving of the Torah. And it works out nicely because if you add 52 to 48, what do you get? You get 100. 100, of course, is when Abraham had Yitzchak, and that was the start of Hashem saying to Abraham at the Bris Ben Absarim that for 400 years you will be a stranger in a strange land, and it began at that very moment. And so then that moment until the Exodus, that's 400 years. And the year of the Exodus was also the year of Matan Torah. And so it all works out nicely. So Amar of Papa. So that was a brief aside based on this calculation. Now Rav Papa has another statement because we've just been using because he also gave the same kind of timeline and method of calculating the years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He also gave a method for figuring out from the Greek date what's the date of how many years we are into the fifth millennium, right? The fifth, how many years are we into we're now actually in the sixth millennium, but how many years are we into the fifth millennium? If you want to know that, Amar Rav Papa, Itai Tana V'lo Yada Prate Kamahavi. If you don't know exactly what year it is, and here Rashi tells us, Itai Tana, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines up near the end of the line. The Tani Ba'avonosenu Shirabu Yatsu Mehen Masha Yatsu, and that in our sins, the days that have happened since the beginning of the fifth millennium have come out of the days that should be of the days of Mashiach. V'Rotzulim knows Kama Yatsu Miyamot HaMashiach, how many days have come out of the days of Mashiach. V'Toa B'Shana O B'Shtayim O Yoter, and you're just not sure about the ones digits and the tens digits, exactly at what number it should be. Delo Yada Prate Al Klal, you know how many centuries it's been, but you don't know the specific number. Hameos Al Klal Hameos, you know how many centuries it's been. Kamahavu. De'ain Adam Toa B'Meos, people don't make a mistake with respect to the number of centuries since a major event. Lefiga Lutzrach Rav Papa Latate Simon B'Tiyusa Klali. So now we're going to give the details as how you can fix and be sure of the right number within of the tens digits and the ones digits. So l'shayla l'safra kamaksiv. So go and ask a scribe what year it is. Now remember, it's 380 years from Yavan to the destruction, but the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash actually happened before the fifth millennium. The fifth millennium is 172 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what do? So we add 172 to 380. What do you get? You get 552. 552. So if it's in year 0, how do I get from 552, from 52 to year 0? We add 48. So v'nitvi alayu arba utamne. So add 48 to it. Umashkach lechumre, and then you'll find your answer. The simanayech, and the siman is, how do we know 48 is an important number? So turn to Ted Amabet. So arba'im u'shmona ir, we have 48 cities of refuge. The Itoi Safra. And if a scribe is unsure, so nishayla latana kama katani. So then they should ask a Tana, how many years has it been since the beginning of the fifth millennium? The Nivtzar Minahu Arba'inu Shmona, and then just subtract 48 from it. Umashkach lechumre, and you'll find your answer. The Simanayach, and the siman for this is similar to the siman for the prior one. Safra B'tzira Tana Tusfa, that a sofer subtracts, a Tana increases. Again, the idea being is that a sofer wants, you can also do it from the perspective of a sofer wants to preserve the ink that they have. So as a result, they want to be more careful. They don't want to spill anything. They don't want to write any extra letters. But a Tana, when he's teaching, he has the ability to speak more and give additional details, and so he wants to be more fulsome in his explanation. Okay, so we are now fourth line on Tedum Bet, and so now the Rav Huna provides a method for determining the Shemitah year. So let's take a look and see what he's got. So Amr of Huna braid the Rabbi Yoshua Haiman de lo yada kama shnei b'shavua hu omed. If you don't know what year you are within the week, and here the week means the 7-year period of the Shemitah cycle. So nitve chad shata, add a year to the number of years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. V'nichshav klale biyovle, and then figure out how many centuries it's been, and therefore how many yovels it's been. Uprate bishavue, and then figure out what the last 2 digits are in terms of 7-year cycles. Venishko memeya trey, and then take 2 from every century, because a yovel period based on this calculation is 49 years. 49 times 2 is 98. That leaves over 2 years. Vinishte aprate, and then you add them to the tens and ones digits. And v'nichshavuni hu liprate b'shavue, and now you can divide that by 7. And that way you don't have to worry about carrying over numbers, right? We know that it's a lot easier to divide 7 into a number between 1 and 100 than it is to divide 7 into 5,672, right? Obviously we can do it because we know the methods, etc., but it might be easier to figure it out by breaking it down. So for example, if you have the number, and I'm just coming up with a number at random, 432. So 400 means that there are 4 centuries. We have to add 8 to 32. So 432, we add 8 to 32, that gets us to 40. So 40 into 7 into 40 is 35 with the remainder of 5. So the remainder is 5. That would tell us that we are in that if the number that we began with was 431, so we add 1, we get 432, we would mean that in that year we're in the 5th year of the Shemitah cycle. Okay, v'yada kama shnei b'shavua, and now you'll know how many years you are within the Shemitah cycle. Simanayich, what's the symbol? What's the sign for you? So kizesh natayim hara'ah b'kerev haaretz. This is how you remember that you need to remember the 2 out of every 100, because these were 2 years of famine throughout the land before when Yosef reveals himself to his brother. The Baal Mor asks, well, I don't understand. Why not just say divide by 7? And he actually says that the Gemara is teaching us that the Yovel, which is usually thought of as a 50-year period, there are 2 views as to what year the Yovel is, the 50th year. Is that a separate year from all of the cycles, so that the year after Yovel becomes the first year of the next 7-year cycle? Or is the Yovel year itself also the first year of the next 49-year cycle? And so according to this Gemara, according to the Baal Mor, we're paskening that it's the first year of the next 49 years and the next 7-year cycle. Okay, so that's that. Let's just do math so that you can see how this actually works, because we can actually use this today, and I'm fudging the numbers a little bit to make it work. The Rishonim, as noted on the screen, I've elided over 2 major debates among the Rishonim as to, one, whether the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed in the year 69 or 70 of the Common Era, and whether the Hebrew year that we use, 5785 right now, follows the same count as used by the Gemara, meaning was the Gemara using a different counting system? But let's ignore those 2 issues for the moment, and let's ask ourselves, right now, it's 2025, okay? So 2025 plus 1 is 2026, right? Because we said the first thing that you have to do is you add 1 to the year. Then we have to, in order to figure, maybe we first, and we then need to subtract 70, which is, let's say, the year that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So that gives us 1,956. Not 1,956 divided by 7 gives you a remainder of 3. So So that means we are right now in the third year of the Shemitah cycle. When will the next Shemitah be? It'll be in 4 years. So in the year that will primarily be 2029, it'll begin in 2028, but in the year that will in the Hebrew year that will primarily be 2029, that will be our Shemitah year, meaning that when we get to 5, 7, 8, 9, that will be a Shemitah year. So now you have a method of figuring out when Shemitah is. So if you can't remember that 5, 7, 8, 9 is a Shemitah year, so then you can remember all I have to do is divide the non-Jewish year by add 1, subtract 70, divide by 7. And the truth is because 70 is divisible by 7, you don't even have to subtract 7. You could just divide by 7, frankly. It just occurs to me. So all you have to do is figure out, take a look at what year it is, but the key is that you got to focus on when you're asking the question about when you ask the question, okay, well, which non-Jewish year it is? It's the year that it's the Jewish year that began the previous September. So the majority of the non-Jewish year is the one that we're going to use based on this calculation, and that can help you figure out what year it is in the Shemitah cycle. Okay, so now the Gemara provides some financial advice that probably wasn't the greatest financial advice in the past, but I don't want to say that it isn't good advice in the very long term. It's just how long the term you need to go. So Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Achar Arba Mayos L'Chorban Habayis. From 400 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, so this is roughly the year 470, Im Yomer Lecha Adam, if a person says to you, Kach Sadeh, buy this field, Shava Elef Dinarim, that's worth $1,000, B'dinar Echad, and I'll sell it to you for $1, Lo Tikach, don't buy it. Now, of course, what does it mean? He's referring to a situation where you're outside the land of Israel. Because the time of Mashiach is so likely to come at that point, don't waste your money in Chutz La'aretz. Rather, buy something in Eretz Yisrael. And so that is the advice. Because the point is that God willing, that will be when the Geula will happen. Unfortunately, that has not happened, but hopefully it will happen soon. B'masnisa Tana, and a Tana taught a similar year, Achar Arbaz Alafim Umasayim Ushloshim V'achas Shana L'Brias Olam. After 4,231 years from the creation of the world, Im Yomer L'cha Adam Kach L'cha Sada Shava Elef Dinarim B'dinar Echad, buy this field that's worth 1,000 for 1, Al Tikach, don't buy it. So my binayu, what's the difference between these two calculations? Meaning, is 400 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash equal to 4,231 from the creation of the world? No, it actually is not. Because, remember, 172 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was when we had year 4,000. So if we add 172 to 231, that gets you 403 years. So it was so the Tana taught a brisa that says it was 403 years. So my beinayu, ik beinayu, tlashnin, there's 3 years of difference between them. Demasnisa tafia tlashne, that the brisa added 3 years to the year that Rabbi Chanina provided. So hahushtara dehaviksibe, that there was a contract, a document that had written in it, and we'll go to Tedam Bet, and we'll do the next little bit until the 2 dots. Shishnin Yisei Rasa, that it had 6 extra years in it. So here you have a document that instead, right now, for example, instead of saying 2025, it said 2031. So Sava Rabbanan Kamei de Rabba Lamemar. So the rabbinical students that were studying in front of Rabba, they thought to say the following: Hi Shtar Me'ucharhu. This is a post-dated contract. So what it's really saying, if I, for example, were to write to you, Stan, an IOU of $1,000 dated 2031, you now are holding that document. If I sell any property today, you won't be able to, well, let's back up and start with a document that's dated today.
Okay.
If I give you a document that's dated today that says I owe you $1,000, and now tomorrow I sell a piece of property, and I don't, well, then you don't have to just go to me, but you know that the buyer of that property, because I gave you a written document with today's date on it, you can go and collect from him because essentially you have a mortgage on all of my property. But if I date that document for 2031, well, then you don't have the ability to go to anybody who buys property from me until June 27th of 2031. So that's what's happening. And so Rashi gives that detail below Tarif. And so as a result, you can't connect until 2031, you can't use it to collect from sold properties.
Right.
As Rashi says, Ma'ocharhu. Take a look, fourth line of the wide lines at the top of Rashi. Malva, that the lender, Asa Imo Tova, did a good thing for the borrower. Umachalo Shibud Karkos. He effectively immunized his he has forgiven and allowed the borrower to avoid having any lien against his land shel sheish shanim for those 6 years. So anyone who buys land from the borrower within those 6 years, eino mafsid, he's not going to lose the land to the lender. Because the time of the sale will be before the time written in the contract. So that was what the rabbinical students thought. But Amar Rav Nachman said, no. Hi Safra Davkana Kasve. No, he was careful. He was actually writing those 6 years, Vahanach Shishnin de Malchu Be'elam, that this was the 6 years that the Greeks ruled in Elam. Because remember, what did we say? We said that if you calculate it, the Greeks began to rule 386 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. But we took off 6 years because that was the 6 years that they only ruled in Elam, and they didn't rule over the entire world. But this scribe was using the original Greek global ruling time period. And so that's why he added 6 years. Da'anan lo chashvinan lahu. We don't count that. Hu kakashiv lahu. But he did count it. Ubizmane kasve. And so as a result, he wrote the proper date, and we should allow the property to be collected. So Tanya, as we have a brisa that supports this point, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Sheishanim Malchu Be'elam. 6 years the Greeks ruled in Elam. And then they spread out to the rest of the world. So the point of this is that now we understand where the 380 came from. We also understand 386. It's interesting, Tosfos points out here that actually all this discussion highlights that if we know the methodology of somebody writing a date in a contract, we don't even need to write like all of the details. You can, custom is sufficient to tell us. Obviously, as a lawyer, I would always say, write the extra detail. You don't want to have to take any chances. But again, in this discussion, everyone assumed, in the discussion we just had, everyone assumed that the contract that was 6 years too long, 6 years into the future, that a date 6 years into the future, was dated from the start of the Greek rule, 380 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. But you know what? Maybe everyone is really counting from the Exodus of Egypt. Because when did the Exodus of Egypt happen? It happened 1,380 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And so maybe we're just leaving off the thousands. And so because, for that challenge and for the Gemara's response, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. So looking forward to continuing our learning together. Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom, Yasher Koach.
Baruch Tiyeh.